What's the scariest thing you've woken up to in the middle of the night? Woke up in the middle of the night to what I thought was my blanket all crammed up between me and the wall. It was uncomfortable, so I went to move it, but instead of a blanket, I touched human skin. Of course, I immediately freak out, and am now wide awake wondering what to do. As I lay in the dark, with this thing laying next to me, so I gather up my courage, reach over, grab it, and yank it up so I can see what it is. It was storming, and lightning flashed very dramatically at the same moment, while I realize I'm holding my own arm. I guess I'd been sleeping on my arm, and it went so numb that I couldn't even tell I was touching it. Haven't laughed that hard in a while. There was this one time, so I live in southwest Colorado, and during the summer months, it gets pretty warm. One night, I was sleeping with my window open. So there I am, dead asleep, when all of a sudden, I just am jolted awake. By what? I had no idea. I lay there a few seconds trying to gain my bearings, when I feel this heavy thing step onto my chest and walk up towards my face. It was like having a huge cat on me. It's making this sound that kinda sounds like your cute ex-girlfriend when she snores, but much faster. As I feel what I could only imagine were whiskers tickling my chin, I'm screaming in my head. Don't move. Stay still. It's chupacabra. Once the whiskers were satisfied that I didn't smell like food, they wandered toward the edge of my bed. I didn't waste any time. I threw the blankets off myself, forcing basically the whole mattress, all my bedding, and chupacabra onto the floor. I stand on the edge of my bed and do a catwalk from bed to bedside table to computer desk until I can finally find the light switch. When I turned the switch, I wasn't prepared for what I saw on the floor. It was the biggest raccoon I'd ever seen in my life, just kinda staring up at me like, dang bro, that's bright. Getting him out of the house was a whole other story entirely. When I was in middle school, my grandmother stayed the night as my parents were away on vacation. She comes in at 3 a.m. and says, "Stimp, do you have any friends over?" I tell her no, and she walks down the hallway. Confused, I roll back over to go back to bed, when I hear something that sounds like breathing from behind my door. "Hello?" I called out, only to be greeted by a shadowy figure appearing from behind my door. From the light in the hallway, I could see it was a tall Hispanic man in a leather jacket, who then looked over to me and said, "You all right? You good?" Me, completely flabbergasted and downright confused, mutter out a quick, "Yep," and try my hardest not to freak out. Then this guy walks over and sits on my bed, looks at me, and says, "Do you want me to let your dogs out for you?" I eventually respond with a no, they're fine. "Do you need help getting out?" To which he nods his head and walks out of my room. I quickly throw on some sweatpants and go down the hallway to the front door, where I see him struggling to open the door handle. "You gotta push then pull," I tell him, and he eventually gets it open. He runs out the front down some stairs as a cop car drives onto our property. At this point, he sees the cop, turns around, and runs right into our basement. The cop calls out to me, "Hey, does that guy live here?" I shake my head no, and he gets his K9 out of his car and lets him loose into the basement. After 10 minutes of searching, they gave up. He apparently got out through a window, and they never caught him. This is my favorite story to tell. I'm absolutely terrified of a home invasion type of situation. I'll blame it on the copious amounts of true crime podcasts that I listen to. So, when I'm home alone, I constantly check the locks and sleep with a knife next to my bed. Husband goes out of town for 2 nights. First night all is good. The second night I check the doors, lock my bedroom door, and go to sleep. Well, I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sound of the door rattling a bit. My first instinct is that it's one of the cats pawing at the door wanting out. But after I've fully woken up, I realize it's someone trying to twist the doorknob. I completely freeze, my heart is racing, and I slowly reach for the light switch. I then start to think that maybe I don't want them to know I'm awake, by turning the light on so that maybe I can hide or grab my knife. Our indoor doorknobs, if you twist them hard enough, will just pop open. So I finally hear it click, and the door just barely opens about 5 inches. I can see the outline of a man standing there, just barely lit from behind by moonlight, coming in the living room sliding door. So I'm just sitting there in this frozen position, with my arm halfway reaching for the light, and the other half reaching for the knife for what feels like an eternity. He just stands there, staring in the door, and I'm convinced I'm about to be murdered. And then the door opens a little bit more, and the man's outline starts to become more clear. I manage to just barely whisper my husband's name, and hear back, "Yeah, why is the door locked?" Dude had decided that the friend he was sharing a hotel with was snoring too loud, and drove home 4 hours in the middle of the night. One night when I was sleeping over at my friend's house, his younger sister, who was apparently a sleepwalker, came into his room in the middle of the night dead asleep, and sat down cross-legged at the end of his bed, with a cup that they had next to the sink in the hallway bathroom that she had somehow grabbed on the way in there. She started putting it on and taking off the end of one of her bare feet like she was trying on shoes, all while half singing, half humming a weird song. To someone like me, who had never witnessed such behavior before, it was a jarring and confusing sight to wake up to. It was more than my 13-year-old brain could process. But my friend just laughed it off, and explained that she sometimes would sleepwalk and sing since she was younger, and it was something he had just gotten used to. Despite my friend's attitude about it all, I can say I wasn't overly eager to sleep over there again. I was 11, woke up to the sound of screaming and shouting. My cousin, who was living with us, was about 17 and in my room holding the door from being opened. On the other side of the door was my mother screaming to be let in. My sister was in the bunk under mine, and she was crying. Suddenly my cousin comes to and opens the door. My mom rushes in and asks my cousin and us if we were okay. There was a commotion in the hallway and living room, but I couldn't tell what it was. When I peeked out of the doorway, I saw my stepfather holding a small .22 caliber rifle and looking out the windows frantically. Suddenly cops show up and start arresting my stepdad. My mom is yelling at the police, and I'm sitting there with my cousin and sister. We all notice the broken sliding glass door, and suddenly realize there are large bullet holes all over our house, through the entertainment center, and above the couch, where my cousin was sleeping just minutes before. I guess what happened is, someone was shooting at some people walking by our apartment, and the stray bullets all hit our place. My cousin woke up, and immediately thought people were inside shooting us, so he ran to the kids' room, and kept anyone from coming in like a badass. My mom woke up, and immediately thought to check on us, but couldn't get into the room because of my cousin. My stepdad grabbed his gun out of instinct. The cops showed up, and assumed my stepdad was the shooter and arrested him. All in all, a pretty fun night. I was somewhere between 7 and 12 years old, maybe 9 or 10, and I think I had the flu or some kind of fever. I went to bed, but then woke up with this horrible feeling. It's hard to even describe to this day, but it's like all my senses went into hyperdrive in an absolutely horrific way. It was similar to the feeling where your foot goes numb, but instead of pins and needles, it's this physical sensation of shaking or vibrating, and it was all over my body, from head to toe, and from my skin down to my core. And it wouldn't stop. At first, it was annoying, but then I started getting scared, and soon I couldn't move without feeling like I was going to explode. It almost felt like an electric current somehow, not painful, but paralyzing and terrifying. The more I moved, the more it got worse. If I tried to roll over, it felt like any part of my body that touched my blankets or my bed was vibrating 100 times a second. So for what felt like an hour, I just laid frozen in bed, feeling like I was shaking or being electrocuted. I could move, and I did try rolling around to make it stop, but it kept getting worse and worse. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and tried to sit up, and it actually felt like I was being shocked in my entire body. I managed to get out of bed, and every time I took a step, I felt like throwing up. I made it into my mom's bedroom and tried to wake her up, but I couldn't speak, then apparently fainted and landed hard on her floor. She freaked out and lifted me into her bed, and then I woke up. The feeling stopped, but I was still shaky. I'm pretty sure she rushed me to the doctor, but I don't remember anything else. I couldn't describe it to her back then, but I said it felt like my body was fighting itself. In hindsight, it was like I had 1,000,000 extra sensors in every part of my body, and they all got turned up to 100. I felt like my body was huge, and I was floating inside it, and every time a part of my body touched anything, it was like my brain thought it tripled in size and started buzzing so heavily that I could barely walk. It had to have been the fever, but I just can't put it into words. This happened a couple of years ago, but comes up frequently in conversations because of how much it freaked me out. Anyways, I woke up and was like completely awake. I just lay there for a moment confused before I hear a faint sound, like the bass of a song being played in a car far away. I look at my phone, and it was 3:30 exactly. I mentally shrug it off and attempt to go back to sleep. Suddenly there is a very loud and prominent drumming sound. Boom, boom, boom. A deep and steady drumming, and I can't figure out where it's coming from. I am now very confused, but entirely unconcerned. I then hear someone walking around my house, and decide to grab my tiny pocket knife and investigate. Walking out into the hall, I run right into my mom, who is literally shaking. Apparently, she woke up at exactly 3:32 and was upset. We spent the following order freaking out, as we go from window to window trying to find the drumming noise. The sound finally stops and was like, okay, that was weird, but I'm freaked out and asked to sleep in my mom's room. We head back to her room, and the drumming sound starts again. This time it sounds like it's right outside the window. My mom goes to the window, and the drum sound just starts moving round and sounds like it's in the house. It only lasted a moment after that, and was silent after. We haven't heard it since. I jokingly asked my neighbor about it the next day, and she said, "Yeah, I heard it too. I thought you guys were playing drums in your house." Weird that my dogs didn't bark though. Still freaks me out to this day. 10 years ago, when I first met my future wife, I was just starting to spend the night at her place. At about 2 a.m., her bedroom door bursts open, and I sit up in bed to a huge dark figure standing in the light from the hallway. I reach down off the bed, grab something hard and brandish it, and yell out, "Hey, get out." The figure stands there for a second, and then says, "Okay, sorry," and leaves. By now she's awake and lets out an, "Oh no," and runs out of the bedroom after him. Turned out it was her ex. He would show up every so often, and her roommate's boyfriend would just let him in the house without question. She's a heavy sleeper, and her ex later admitted he'd come in and watch her sleep. She wouldn't have known if I hadn't woken up. The next day, I went out and changed the locks just in case, and we had a long talk with the roommate's boyfriend about not letting him inside anymore. It's a funny story, but over a decade later, and I still have issues sleeping through the night, because I'm afraid someone will come into my house. Weirdly though, I fell right back asleep after she left the room that night. Also, the thing I brandished at him turned out to be a plastic My Little Pony that belonged to my daughter. A home invasion. As I'm laying sound asleep in my bed, I wake to having a bright light source shining on my face. I open my eyes and see two sets of feet standing directly next to my bed. My first thought upon waking is that it is the police. I very quickly realize though that these are not cops, but burglars. Amazingly, I don't at all cower, but instead feel an intense surge of anger. I immediately jump out of bed and begin to scream at the top of my lungs, "Get out of my apartment." I continue to scream this like a chant. The burglars immediately do a turnabout and book it out of my apartment with me in the chase. When I chase them out my patio door, I stop, as I'm only wearing underwear. I find that all of my electronic components are unplugged and ready to be stolen. However, everything is in place except for my CDs, which are gone. The police were very good about how they responded. They sent a CSI person to take prints of my apartment, and the detective responsible for my case even phoned me 2 days later to say that no matches to the prints were found. I wasn't surprised. I think they were just a couple of brazen teenagers. I told the cop, "How stupid can you be to shine a flashlight into someone's face and not expect them to wake up?" He told me, "Well, criminals aren't exactly known for having high intelligence, which is one of the reasons they are criminals." Good point. Anyway, only after these two idiots were out of my apartment did it occur to me that they could have been armed and could have panicked and got the situation worse. It was only at that point that I felt the anxiety of fear. My mum died 4 years ago, when I was 18 and my brother was 23. She died from a 7-year battle with breast cancer. This happened about 4 days after Mum died, and it was the evening after her funeral. It was about 7 p.m, and my dad, brother, and I were upstairs in our respective rooms. All our bedrooms run off a single hallway, with my dad's room at one end, then the staircase, and my brother's room, and my room next to each other at the opposite end. The house was just about silent. Mum's phone and iPad were turned off in my room, as I was planning to go through them and put all the photos onto my computer the following day. I was on my phone in bed looking at family photos with my cat asleep next to me, when I heard, as clear as day, my mum laugh and say, "Honey, I'm happy," from downstairs. My cat woke up and looked towards the door. I got up and walked out of my room into the hallway, and saw my dad and brother standing outside their rooms too, just looking at each other in shock. Without saying anything, we all knew we heard it. My dad broke down crying, and after comforting him, we all went back to our rooms. My nanny and mum were able to communicate with spirits and our ancestors, so I am a very spiritual person. I, along with my brother and dad, truly believe it was my mum coming back to tell us that she was no longer in pain and was finally at peace. I later got, "Honey, I'm happy," tattooed on my chest over my heart. I stumbled downstairs to get some water from the tap at about 2 a.m. I look out of the window directly in front of me and stare into pitch darkness. You can't see anything more than a few feet. Turn the tap off, look up, and there's a dude's face just staring back at me. He's so close he's practically got his nose to the glass. A face that makes Gollum look like a model. This guy is obviously a serial killer. At least that's what my sleep-addled mind was thinking. I keep staring, he also keeps staring. Until he starts pointing. He's pointing at the outside tap. He's doing that because he's a homeless dude getting water for himself and his friends, who have started living in the woods nearby. He smiles at me, this black-toothed grin, so I smile back and nod. He fills his water bottles and buggers off back to the woods. Over the next few months, I got to know them all, and they were super nice. They'd come for water, and I'd leave them little care packages of food until they moved on to somewhere else, presumably to scare someone else in the middle of the night. I moved into my first apartment and got a cat. On my third night there, I'm woken by the sound of my kitten seemingly screaming in pain. I frantically searched the apartment to find him, and he's just sitting on the couch, sleeping. Confused, I go back to bed. A few minutes later, he's howling again. I go to the living room and still, he's sleeping on the couch. Then another scream. He looks at me, and immediately hides under the couch. I realize the scream is coming from the bedroom. I search everywhere. Under the bed, in the closet, and in the adjoining bathroom. Nothing. The next scream I realize is coming from the back hall. I go to my door, and look through the peephole. The old woman who lives below me, and shares the back hall with me, is standing on my landing, staring at the wall with a blank look on her face, screaming like a cat. I found out later that she was pretty severely mentally ill. Other than this instance, she was the perfect neighbor. I miss her dearly.